What if a 3.5 minute Taylor Swift pop song and a 16th century political treatise on like ruthless survival are actually talking about the exact same thing?
I mean, it sounds like the setup to a bizarre academic joke, honestly.
Yeah.
Or maybe a fever dream you have after falling asleep in a library while wearing headphones?
Right. It really does. On the surface, the contrast is just absurd because on one side, you have the glitter, the stadium tours, the massive synth pop
Yeah,
beats.
exactly.
And then on the other, you have a dusty, parchment-bound manual for Renaissance dictators,
Ah,
written by a guy who was literally tortured by his own government.
it's quite the contrast.
But what if the geopolitics of the human heart actually mirror the survival tactics of Renaissance Florence? Like, what if a getaway car in a song isn't just a story about a messy breakup, but a literal masterclass in strategic exfiltration?
That is exactly what we are getting into today. We are pulling from an incredibly unconventional source text for this deep dive.
Yeah, it's a wild one.
It really is. It's a book by this enigmatic author known only as Mouse-Colored Cat. And the title lays the cards right on the table. It's called Getaway Car. Machiavelli meets Taylor Swift.
Just a brilliant title, honestly.
Right. And the ambition of this text is to completely dismantle the artificial walls we erect between what society deems, high culture philosophy and low culture pop music.
Okay, let's unpack this right from the first page, because the book opens with this really fascinating epigraph.
It does, yeah.
It quotes Taylor Swift from a 2022 interview where she mentions that when she was 15 and putting together her first album, she decided to encode the lyrics with hidden messages.
And the author, Mouse-Colored Cat, follows that quote with a direct challenge to you, the reader. They write, whether this was intentional or not is up to you, or perhaps we are simply reading all too well.
Reading all too well.
I love that.
It's an invitation for you, listening right now, to look at the pop culture you consume through a radically different lens.
Exactly. It's asking you to totally reevaluate your own media consumption.
But before we get to the 16th century, or, even the mechanics of a rebound relationship, we have to talk about the smirk.
Oh, the smirk. Yes. We definitely need to address the smirk.
You know the exact smirk I'm talking about. If you tell a serious academic or a self-proclaimed music snob that you are comparing Taylor Swift to Niccolò Machiavelli, they are absolutely going to smirk at you.
They really are. And the author actually anticipates that smirk right in the preface. They acknowledge that serious people are going to find this pairing inherently ridiculous.
Right, because for a certain type of intellectual, just putting a pop star in the same sentence as a foundational philosopher is like an offense to the discipline.
It's seen as degrading the philosophy, yeah. But the author pushes back with a really vital question, which is, why does that idea make us smirk in the first place?
Like, why is our knee-jerk reaction to dismiss it as a gimmick?
Exactly. And to answer that, the book brings in the French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu, specifically his landmark concept of distinction.
Oh, Bourdieu. Yeah, this part of the text was fascinating.
It really is. So Bourdieu argued that the line we draw between what we consider profound art and what we dismiss as mere entertainment actually has very little to do with the intellectual depth of the work itself.
Wait, really? So it's not about the actual quality of the art?
No, not really. It is almost entirely about social sorting. High culture isn't automatically profound, and pop culture isn't automatically shallow. The real difference is the barrier to entry.
Okay, that makes sense. Like, who gets to access it?
Exactly. High culture requires credentials to access. You need the university syllabus, the expensive liberal arts education, the specialized jargon to even, participate in the conversation about a 16th century philosopher.
Right, you can't just stumble into a conversation about Machiavelli at a coffee shop without feeling like you need a degree first.
Exactly. But pop culture, conversely, circulates freely. It travels via Spotify playlists, radio stations, TikTok trends. Everyone has access to it.
So think about it like a VIP section at a highly exclusive nightclub. The vodka they pour in the VIP section isn't fundamentally different from the vodka they pour at the main bar on the general admission floor.
It's the exact same liquid.
Right. The liquid is the same.
Mm.
But the velvet rope, the bouncer, and the exorbitant cover charge make the people inside believe they are consuming something elevated.
It makes them feel special by excluding everyone else.
Exactly. So is high philosophy just protecting its intellectual velvet rope?
That is the absolute core of Bourdieu's argument applied here. If millions of people can understand and enjoy something, it loses its power to act as a status symbol.
Because anyone can have it.
Right. You can't use it to signal your superior education if the entire crowd at a football stadium is singing along to it. Philosophy has built an incredible velvet rope out of complex terminology and historical reverence.
But, and I think this is a crucial distinction the author makes so we don't misrepresent the text.
The book isn't claiming that Taylor Swift is a philosopher in the traditional academic sense. Right, she isn't publishing peer-reviewed papers on ontology.
No, she's not submitting to academic journals. But the argument is about the nature of the problems being addressed.
Exactly. As the text says, to simplify is to flatten, but to translate is to risk.
And the book risks translating these spheres by pointing out that the anxieties Swift sings about the unreliability of memory, the shifting dynamics of power and intimate relationships, the desperate longing for personal freedom, the construction of identity.
These are the exact same fundamental human problems that haunted Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Hannah Arendt, and Friedrich Nietzsche.
The raw material is absolutely identical.
It is. The only difference is the venue. Nietzsche wrote in complete isolation. Swift asks these questions and processes these deep existential anxieties in front of 70,000 screaming people in a stadium.
She doesn't ask permission from the Academy to tackle the human condition.
She just does it. Which brings us to one of the most charming literary devices in the entire text, the apocryphal foreword.
Oh, I loved this part.
The author writes an imagined foreword titled Taylor's Way, written entirely from the perspective of Swift herself at, 2 in the morning.
It sets such a tone of affectionate subversion. In this imagined foreword, the fictionalized Taylor reflects on spending her life trying to capture lightning in a bottle.
Yeah, sitting on the floor in her pajamas, trying to logically decipher why time seems to literally stop when your heart breaks.
And she talks about the condescension she faces, being told for years that her feelings were too much, or that she was just writing dramatic breakup songs for teenage girls.
As if the emotional turbulence of adolescence isn't a completely valid arena for human suffering or philosophical discovery.
Right. The fictional Taylor writes, this book imagines that these questions are not just girls' problems, they are philosophers' problems.
She poses this wild idea that, without knowing it, while writing about a boy with blue eyes, she might have actually been debating with Plato about the nature of illusion.
Or arguing with Jean-Paul Sartre about how the gaze of others traps us in an identity we don't want.
It totally reframes the fan experience. It tells the audience that their intensity is not a weakness or, a punchline. Their doubts are philosophy.
And the humor is just incredibly sharp. The foreword ends with this casual throwaway line, apparently Kant loved the bridge in Cruel Summer.
I laughed out loud at that. The visual of Immanuel Kant, the architect of the Critique of Pure Reason, emphatically nodding along to a pop bridge in an 18th century carriage, it just perfectly executes the mission of the book.
It tears down the velvet rope with a smile.
It really does. But to really understand the specific song we are analyzing today, Getaway Car, we have to understand the philosopher sitting on the other side of this theoretical table.
Right. We need to leave the stadium and travel back to 16th century Italy. We need to look at Niccolò Machiavelli.
And we really need to strip away centuries of myth here, because the Machiavelli presented in this text is not the cartoon villain we see in movies.
Yeah, if you want to understand this strategic maneuver in a song about a tactical breakup, you have to understand the historical architect of strategic thinking.
Exactly. So he was born in Florence in 1469, and Florence at this time was a republic, but an incredibly volatile one. As the book puts it, leaders change as often as shirts, and change was rarely smooth.
Florence was basically a geopolitical pressure cooker. You had the immense wealth of the Medici banking family, you had interference from the Pope in Rome.
You had French armies marching through the peninsula, and you had roving bands of mercenaries whose loyalty went to the highest bidder.
In that chaos, Machiavelli, who was just the son of a modest lawyer, rose entirely on his own merit. He entered the service of Florentine diplomacy and stayed there for 14 years.
He was the ultimate frontline observer of raw power. He traveled incessantly across Italy and Europe, negotiating directly with kings, popes, and warlords like Caesar Borgia.
So he saw exactly how the sausage was made. He watched how power is gained through deception, how it is lost through hesitation, and how it is forcefully taken back through violence.
And the author notes that what Machiavelli witnessed didn't make him cynical, it made him precise. He became a scientist of human behavior.
But then we hit the critical turning point in his life, the year 1512.
This is where his entire life collapses.
Yeah, the political winds shift. The Medici family, backed by Spanish troops, returns to power in Florence and overthrows the republic Machiavelli had served.
And Machiavelli is suddenly on the wrong side of the regime change. He is purged from his diplomatic post. He is arrested under suspicion of conspiracy.
And he isn't just questioned, right? He is subjected to the strappado.
Yeah, a really brutal form of torture where a person's hands are tied behind their back. They are hoisted into the air by a rope and then dropped just short of the floor. It completely dislocates the shoulders.
Oh, wow. That is horrifying.
It is. He endures this, maintains his innocence the whole time, and is eventually released. But he is exiled to a small, rural country estate at San Casciano.
He is completely stripped of his title, his influence, his income, his entire life's purpose is just gone.
And there, completely cut off from the intoxicating world of power, wearing mud-stained clothes from working in the woods all day, he returns to his study at night.
He literally puts on his old diplomatic robes.
He does. He puts on his robes and does the only thing he has left. He writes.
In 1513, he writes The Prince, a tiny book, barely 100 pages, that ends up terrifying and shaping Europe for 500 years.
And this is where the source text is desperate to clarify a massive historical misunderstanding. Machiavelli has been caricatured for centuries as an apostle of evil, the guy who invented political backstabbing.
But the book stresses that Machiavelli did not invent cruelty. He simply described it. He described cruelty as a climate, not a vice.
Yes.
Let me make sure I'm getting the nuance here. It's like a meteorologist studying a hurricane. You don't call the meteorologist evil for predicting that the storm is going to destroy houses.
Right. You don't get mad at the rain for being wet.
Exactly. You just learn to build stronger levees and carry an umbrella.
That is a highly accurate way to frame his philosophy. He believed that power, in its rawest form, is neither inherently good nor inherently bad. It is simply a mechanism.
It's just necessary for order.
Right. And if you, as a leader, refuse to understand the mechanics of power because you want to keep your hands morally clean, you will inevitably be crushed by those who have no such qualms.
So the underlying rule of the prince wasn't be evil. It was simply, don't be naive.
Exactly. Don't be naive. Which brings us to his most famous and most misunderstood concept, virtue.
And for you listening, we need to be very clear that this is not virtue in the Christian, moral, Sunday school sense of the word.
Not at all. Machiavellian virtue is a specific, highly tactical blend of traits. It is intelligence, audacity, a flawless sense of timing, and radical adaptability.
It's the ability to act decisively when the winds of fortune change direction.
He famously wrote that a leader must know how to be a lion to roar and terrify the wolves, but he must equally know how to be a fox, to recognize the trap set for him.
And he viewed human promises as completely transactional.
Yeah. Extremely transactional. He wrote that promises only bind those who believe in them. Yeah. Furthermore, he believed that fortune, the chaotic, capricious chance that dictates so much of human life, always favors those who move faster than she does. Speed, adaptability, and an unsentimental view of your own circumstances are absolutely everything.
Okay, I have to jump in and challenge this because it's the glaring paradox of his entire life.
I know exactly where you're going with this.
Right. If Machiavelli was such an absolute genius of power, if he figured out the definitive, overarching cheat code for political survival, why did he die in 1527 poor, exiled, and completely forgotten?
It's the ultimate irony.
Isn't it? The guy who wrote the literal manual on seizing and holding power couldn't hold on to it himself. If his theories are so bulletproof, why was his own life a political failure?
The text we are analyzing explicitly acknowledges that paradox. The greatest theorist on seizing power never managed to regain his own.
So what's the takeaway then?
Well, his legacy isn't his own personal power. His legacy is his unflinching gaze. The value of a coach isn't always their ability to play the game on the field, but their ability to see the entire board from the sidelines.
Okay. That makes sense.
Machiavelli was the first thinker to completely separate morality from politics.
But why separate them? Why build a system that rewards the ruthless over the righteous?
Because he looked at the world as it actually was, not as he wished it to be. He separated morality from politics because he saw too many good, moral, principled people being devoured by ruthless, effective people.
Florence was full of pious men who lost their republics, their fortunes, and their heads because they hesitated when violence or deception was required for survival.
Exactly. When you frame it like that, it stops sounding like a relic of the 16th century and starts sounding uncomfortably modern.
Think about corporate environments. We've all seen good, honest people get passed over for promotions or entirely pushed out of companies because they played by the moral rules of fairness.
Right, while someone else in the office played by the effective rules of leverage and optics.
Machiavelli is just the guy turning the lights on and pointing out the reality of the game being played.
He strips away the illusions, he looks at every relationship, every political alliance, every smile across a negotiating table, and asks the fundamental question, who benefits from this journey? And when does the journey stop benefiting them?
Who benefits from the journey? Which is the perfect conceptual link to take us right into the pop culture artifact at the center of this deep dive.
Yes, let's apply this unsentimental Florentine worldview to the song Getaway Car from Taylor Swift's Reputation era.
So we entered the section of the book called The Geopolitics of the Heart. And to illustrate the philosophical divide, the author sets up a conceptual segment called The Dinner Conversation.
It's an imagined dialogue between two architects, right? The snob and the Swiftie.
And this dialogue perfectly captures how differently people view the exact same narrative event.
So how does the snob see it?
The snob looks at the lyrics and the storyline of Getaway Car and sees something highly immoral. The snob argues that the song glorifies infidelity and manipulation.
Because it's about using someone.
Right. It's about a woman who uses one man essentially as the taxi to escape another man and then abandons the driver when she's safe. To the snob, there is nothing noble about it. It's a callous act of using a human being as a vehicle.
But then the Swiftie counters, bringing Machiavelli right into the center of the dinner party.
And what does the Swiftie argue?
The Swiftie points out the context. Machiavelli wrote his manual on survival right after being exiled, after experiencing the total collapse of his environment. The Swiftie argues that in the narrative of the song, the protagonist is leaving a relationship that has become toxic, suffocating, and uninhabitable.
She's trapped.
Yes. She is using the only means available to her at that precise moment to secure her freedom. Therefore, it's not infidelity in the traditional romantic sense. It is exfiltration.
Exfiltration. That is such a heavy, tactical military word to use for a breakup.
It changes the entire paradigm from a romance novel to a spy thriller.
It does, and that is the point. The Swiftie adds a crucial Machiavellian tenet. Machiavelli didn't judge those who flee a losing battle. He judged those who flee badly.
He judged those who fail to secure an exit route when the walls are closing in, those who let misplaced morality trap them in a doomed territory.
Let's ground this in a tactical analogy. Think of a spy operating deep behind enemy lines who has just been burned.
Okay, I like this.
Their cover is blown, the hostile forces are closing in, and they need an immediate extraction. They don't have time to wait for the perfect, ethically sourced diplomatic helicopter.
They hotwire the nearest vehicle.
Exactly. Or they use an asset who thinks they are a friend solely to get across the border. They don't have a deep emotional attachment to that extraction vehicle. They aren't promising that vehicle a shared future in the suburbs. It is simply a mechanism for survival.
And in the narrative of the song, the driver of the getaway car is operating under a completely different assumption. The driver thinks he is the hero of a new romance. He thinks this is the beginning of a beautiful story.
But the protagonist knows, from the very first verse, that he is just the means of transportation. As the lyrics say, nothing good starts in a getaway car. She is fully aware of the transactional nature of the alliance, even if he isn't.
Is it cold to the driver? Absolutely. But is it necessary for her survival? The Machiavellian reading says yes.
And that is exactly how the Swiftie replies to the snob. The snob says the song's premise is cold. The Swiftie replies, it's Florentine. And if you find that cold, it's because you've never needed to flee.
Wow.
Yeah. The Swiftie makes the bold, overarching claim that every relationship is political. The getaway car in the song isn't a vehicle, it's an emergency exit.
To reinforce this reading, the book includes another incredible creative device, a letter from philosopher.
It's an imagined letter written by Niccolò Machiavelli himself, addressed across the centuries to a modern Swiftie. It's written with the cautious, weary tone of a man who has seen hundreds of alliances fail. Machiavelli states plainly that in his long observations of princes and states, alliances are rarely born of true affection.
They are born of pure necessity.
Right, people or nations join forces to escape a mutual threat or to leave a territory that has become uninhabitable. He writes, today's ally is not always tomorrow's companion.
Today's ally is not always tomorrow's companion. That is brutal.
But it is so deeply, structurally true to the narrative of a rebound relationship.
He notes that the tragedy, or rather the strategic error in the song, is that the driver confuses means and ends. The driver thought the alliance was the end goal, the final destination.
But they were only driving toward an exit from the previous entanglement.
And Machiavelli drops this profound thought. Stubborn loyalty to a lost cause is sometimes less moral than an intelligent flight. It is strategically better to abandon an alliance at the exact right moment than to go down with the ship out of a misplaced sense of romantic loyalty.
If you are listening to this, think about the paradigm shift here. We are taking the standard cultural narrative of the messy rebound, something tabloid magazines and internet commenters love to judge, moralize over, and dissect for drama.
And we are completely reframing it as a necessary, intelligent act of political survival. We are giving a pop culture trope historical weight.
The author doesn't just stop at the dinner party debate, though. To show how deeply this concept can be analyzed, the text explores how different types of intellectuals would process this exact same strategic maneuver.
We get two incredibly contrasting voices to explain this phenomenon.
This section is brilliant because it feels like we are auditing two very different college courses back to back. First, the author introduces us to Professor Malak Merriwell.
Merriwell represents the hyper-academic, heavily jargon-laden, theoretical side of the university.
He looks at Getaway Car and starts lecturing about the, quote, divide between declarative normativity and circumstantial operativity.
Let's break that down because it sounds totally impenetrable.
Please do.
Declarative normativity is what we openly declare we should do based on societal morals. We should be honest, we shouldn't use people, we should honor commitments.
Okay, the rules we say we live by.
Exactly. Circumstantial operativity, on the other hand, is what we actually have to do to operate and survive in a specific high-pressure circumstance. Merriwell argues that the space of romantic love isn't a neutral vacuum. It's a grid structured by power relations.
And he says that when a relational environment reaches critical toxicity, escaping it isn't a vice. It is what he calls a thermodynamic necessity.
Thermodynamic necessity implies that the system is overheating. The pressure has built up to the point of explosion, so the subject has to eject to dissipate the heat.
Merriwell calls this act kinetic sovereignty.
The power of the individual to act quickly and precede the collapse of the relationship. He even goes so far as to call the entire song a metaphor for liquid modernity.
Liquid modernity. That's a concept from the sociologist Zygmunt Bauman, isn't it?
It is. Bauman's theory is that in our contemporary globalized world, society changes too fast for habits, institutions, or relationships to solidify. Everything is liquid.
We flow from job to job, from city to city, from relationship to relationship.
We don't own the territory, we just pass through it. Merriwell argues that the Getaway Car is the ultimate vehicle of liquid modernity, transactional, temporary, and constantly in motion.
It's a dense, highly theoretical reading that makes you feel like you need a PhD to listen to the radio.
It really does.
But immediately after Merriwell's lecture, the author introduces Gaston Blunder. Blunder is the ultimate layman translator. He is the guy at the pub who cuts through all of Merriwell's academic fog.
Blunder essentially says, look, Merriwell is using $50 words to say that she practiced the high-speed geopolitics of the heart.
Blunder argues that when a relationship becomes radioactive, you don't sit around having a moral debate about loyalty or normative ethics. You grab the keys and you drive.
Blunder points out that the driver thought he was the future, but he was actually just a bridge to get her over the moat.
And Blunder drops this incredible cynical line. He says, people talk about loyalty until the day they really need an escape route.
That is pure, distilled Machiavelli right there. And to engage the reader directly in this debate, the author includes a multiple-choice quiz titled, Who Wants to Win Nothing?
Asking the reader to classify the action in the song based on what they've just read.
Exactly.
Let me pose this quiz directly to you. Which side do you land on? In the context of the song is this act. A pure and simple moral betrayal. B, a cynical, premeditated manipulation. C, a circumstantial necessity falling under the Machiavellian category of virtù. Or D, a metaphor for liquid affective modernity.
What's crucial to realize is that both Professor Merriwell and Gaston Blunder, despite their vastly different vocabularies, are ultimately making the exact same point.
Morality lingers in the mind, but survival decides the action.
An impartial reporting of this text requires us to be very clear about the author's intent here. The book is not advocating for a life of maliciously manipulating people.
Right. It is not a sociopath's handbook advising you to use everyone you meet.
It's not an endorsement of cruelty, it's an observation of mechanism.
Precisely. It is impartially pointing out that when a human being is trapped in a toxic, collapsing, or dangerous situation, self-preservation overrides societal manners.
Utilizing a temporary alliance to escape is a fundamental human survival mechanism. We accept it in war, we accept it in politics, we accept it in business.
We are just unaccustomed to hearing it stated so plainly and analyzing it so ruthlessly in the context of a pop song about romance.
To make this abstract theoretical debate perfectly visually clear, the author gives us one more thought experiment. And it is incredibly cinematic. Let's set the scene.
Oh, I love this part. It's a rainy night in London. The neon lights are blurring on the wet pavement. We are looking at the backseat of an Uber.
And sitting next to each other in the back of this car are Taylor Swift and Niccolò Machiavelli.
It's the ultimate impossible taxi ride. The tension in the car must be thick.
As they ride through the city listening to the windshield wipers, Machiavelli observes that modern people love to give high-minded moral names to very simple, mechanical things.
Like a useful alliance that was simply never meant to last.
He tells her she executed a flawless maneuver.
But Swift pushes back a little, showing a glimmer of guilt. She says the problem is that the driver thought it was the start of a story. He thought he was participating in a romance.
And Machiavelli waves off the concern. He replies, "Classic mistake, confusing the car with the destination."
He tells her that politics, and by extension the geopolitics of the heart, is rarely kind to passengers who don't understand the route.
Then the car arrives at its destination. The driver turns off the engine, takes off his cap, and turns around to face them.
And the punchline of the entire scene is, it's Tom Hiddleston.
The actual celebrity famously associated with the specific era, the highly publicized summer romance that served as the transitional narrative between two major relationships.
A brilliant meta joke. Hiddleston looks back at them and says he's been driving, quote, since I realized that some stories are just journeys.
It crystallizes the entire concept of the transitional lover perfectly. He recognizes that he was the temporary ally, the extraction vehicle.
When they finally get out of the car, what is the ultimate takeaway from this bizarre Uber ride? How does Machiavelli sum it up?
As Machiavelli opens the door to step out into the rain, he delivers the final, brutal lesson of the scene. A prudent prince never promises the kingdom when all he needs is a horse.
When all he needs is a horse? That hits so hard.
It completely offends our modern sensibilities. We are raised on a steady, intoxicating diet of romantic comedies, soulmates, and happily ever afters. We want every relationship, every connection to be the kingdom.
But this quote stripped all the romantic illusion out of the rebound relationship and exposes the bare strategic bones underneath.
Historically, politically, and emotionally, sometimes you don't need a partner for life. You just need the horse to get out of the danger zone.
It is incredibly blunt, but when you look at the mechanics of human behavior, you can't deny the structural truth of it. We've just spent a significant amount of time connecting stadium pop music to Renaissance political theory.
We've redefined messy breakups as tactical exfiltrations.
But here is the massive twist in the book. Why did the mysterious author, Mouse-Colored Cat, actually write this? What is the real point of mixing a 21st century pop star with a 16th century philosopher? It can't just be a clever literary exercise.
It isn't. We find the true motive in the book's afterword, which is titled Antidote to Algorithmic Inbreeding.
And it pivots entirely to a subject that seems unrelated at first, but is actually the most pressing issue of our time, artificial intelligence.
The author basically drops a bomb on the reader and admits that this entire book, the analogies, the historical blending, the imagined dialogues, would have been materially impossible to write without large language models, without AI.
Yes. The author openly acknowledges using AI to help construct the text, calling these models stochastic parrots of infinity that read everything and understand nothing.
But the author isn't using AI to be lazy or to just churn out content. They're using it to highlight a massive impending danger in our digital age, a technical concept they call digital autophagy.
Autophagy. Self-eating. What is the mechanism behind that? How does an AI eat itself?
To understand this, we need to understand how large language models work. These models are trained on massive data sets of human-created textbooks, articles, websites, forums. They learn the statistical probability of which word or token comes next in a sequence.
But here is the crisis. As AI generates more and more content on the internet, future AI models will increasingly be trained on datasets that contain AI-generated content.
It's a recursive loop. The system starts training on synthetic data. It feeds on its own outputs.
So it's like making a photocopy of a photocopy. Every time you copy it, you lose resolution.
Exactly. But it's worse than just losing resolution. When AI trains on human data, it encounters the full, messy spectrum of human thought, the brilliant, the bizarre, the contradictory.
But AI-generated text tends to favor the most mathematically probable average responses.
When a model trains on its own average responses, the statistical distribution of language flattens. The tails of the distribution, the weird, fringe, highly creative ideas get clipped off.
The author warns that in this loop of digital autophagy, thought becomes smoother, safer, and infinitely more average with every single iteration.
It's the slow degradation of meaning. As the author points out, the more we generate, the less we create. The machine just produces an endless stream of safe conformity.
To combat this inevitable flattening, the author introduces a philosophical countermeasure called capacitivism.
The solution isn't to violently unplug the machines or reject digital tools entirely. The solution is to intentionally overload the system, to inject friction into the smooth, predictive algorithmic circuit.
How do you inject friction into an algorithm?
By doing things that make no statistical sense. AI can organize vast amounts of information, but it cannot dare. It cannot make conceptual leaps that defy logical categorization based on past data.
The author calls this act of deliberate defiance intellectual vandalism.
Intellectual vandalism, breaking the predictable patterns of thought.
Yes, and the author asserts that this vandalism is a distinctly human trait. As the text explicitly says, there is no training data in the algorithm that would naturally connect the post-structuralist philosophy of Gilles Deleuze with a tube of lipstick.
There is no predictive probability that would organically place Niccolò Machiavelli in the back of a getaway car with Taylor Swift.
Because it's statistically absurd.
Exactly. We have to force the machine onto the unmapped side roads. The author argues that we must act as the data sovereign.
The data sovereign. The master of the flow, not the servant to it.
The citizen of tomorrow isn't someone who passively consumes whatever perfectly tailored average content the algorithm feeds them on their timeline.
The sovereign citizen is the one who actively bends the flow, who disturbs the underlying logic.
The mysterious mouse-colored cat has deliberately entered the machine, using AI as a tool to force it to assemble an object, this very book, that the algorithm would never ever have dared to assemble on its own.
It required a human mind to misbehave creatively.
Only humans can misbehave creatively. That is a profound realization to land on after the journey we've just taken.
We started with Pierre Bourdieu and the sociology of taste, breaking down the velvet ropes that separate the elite VIP section of academic philosophy from the massive pop culture dance floor.
We journeyed into the bloody politics of 1512 Florence to watch Machiavelli endure the strappado and exile, leading him to separate morality from political survival and coin the unsentimental concept of virtù.
We applied that raw strategic worldview directly to a Taylor Swift rebound relationship, radically reframing the messy breakup as a calculated, necessary geopolitical emergency exit.
A situational imperative where you grab the life vest or take the horse instead of falsely promising the kingdom.
And we ended up staring down the barrel of the AI apocalypse, discovering that the statistical collapse of language means our best and perhaps only weapon against algorithmic conformity is human intellectual vandalism. We have to keep making the impossible connection.
We really do.
So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over today as you go back to your life. The next time you listen to a seemingly simple pop song on the radio, or you sit down to watch a supposedly low-culture reality TV show, or you scroll through a perfectly curated algorithm, look a little closer.
Are you just passively consuming a smooth, mathematically average piece of entertainment?
Or are you actually witnessing a hidden, ancient manual for human survival playing out in real time right in front of you?
That makes you wonder what other modern pop anthems are secretly ancient philosophy in disguise, just waiting for someone to decode them and disrupt the algorithm.
It really does. Keep daring to make those weird connections. Keep seeking out the friction in the world. And whatever you do, never confuse the getaway car with the destination.